He used to be the first to show up at every gathering, the one who stirred the atmosphere, the one who could start a conversation with anyone using just a simple joke. He once thought noise was proof that he was alive, connected, present. Crowded nights once made him feel warm. Laughter once made him feel acknowledged. But then, he didn't know when, that feeling disappeared. One day, he was still there with them, with old friends, with old stories, but inside him was a silence no one could reach. No one did anything wrong. They were still friendly, still asked how he was, still clinked glasses. But everything started to feel meaningless. He smiled out of politeness, nodded to get through, but inside, he was only counting the time until he could leave. And the strange thing was, he wasn't sad, not angry. Just that, he didn't need it anymore. No need for more hollow compliments. No need for connections to fill the void. No need for relationships just to hold a place in someone's life where he no longer belonged. Instead of trying to blend into that noise, he stepped back. Not out of disappointment, but because he was calm enough to realize, in some places, his silence was more honest than 1,000 social words. So, what happened? What made someone once so lively choose to stand outside of every joy, and no longer want to step back in? He used to be the connector, the one who made the plans, sent the first messages, reached out just so no one would feel left out. He used to fear the thought of someone being abandoned, so he was always the one keeping the ties from breaking. From spontaneous coffee meetups to late-night calls just to ask, "Are you okay today?" He was always ready. But did anyone ever ask him back? Did anyone ever notice that he was the one being left behind? On the outside, he laughed a lot, always showed up on time, always knew how to set the mood. But inside, there was an emptiness no one ever really touched. No one asked, "Are you tired?" No one paused when they saw his forced smile, because everyone was used to the image of an easygoing man. He once blended in so well that he forgot he, too, had feelings that needed to be heard. Forgot that while he was staying connected with the whole world, he was becoming more and more distant from himself. There were nights when after a gathering he came home, closed his door, and didn't know why his heart felt so heavy. He wasn't lonely because he lacked people around. He was lonely because in the middle of the crowd, no one really saw him. And then, he began to realize, the price of always showing up for others was that, little by little, he disappeared from his own life. He once thought, if he just tried a little harder, everything would be fine. So he accepted invitations, even when deep down he only wanted to stay home. He nodded to gatherings he no longer had any interest in. He sat at the table, listened to stories, added a few words out of courtesy, then went quiet. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew no one would really listen. He had tried many times to keep going, tried to please people who were too used to him always being there, tried to maintain relationships that only existed out of politeness, tried to hold on to the image of someone easygoing, funny, sociable even when inside he was empty. And in every effort, he lost a part of his energy. No one noticed he was slowly withdrawing from conversations. No one paid attention to how his eyes dimmed while listening to the same stories repeated. No one saw him sitting there, awkward, just so no one would be disappointed. Until one day, he stopped trying. He still sat there, among everyone, but didn't speak, didn't try to start conversations, didn't add more laughter. He stayed silent, looked around, and realized he could disappear right then, and no one would really care. So he withdrew, gently, without anger, without warning, because he had tried too much. And now, he just wanted peace. That morning, for the first time in a long time, he woke up without being pushed into any plans. No calls waiting for a response. No reminders of, when will we meet again? No one needing him to show up to hold a relationship together. Just him and silence. He made coffee himself. No sugar, no cream, no need to look pretty for a post somewhere. Just what he liked, what suited him, and for the first time, served only himself. He sat down to eat alone, slowly, didn't check his phone during the meal, didn't think about what he should text to anyone. He walked around the streets, no headphones, no motivational podcasts, no music forcing him to feel cheerful. He just listened to his footsteps against the ground, the wind brushing his shirt, the city alive without demanding anything from him. He sat at an old sidewalk cafe, watched the crowd pass by, and no one urged him, "Why aren't you saying anything?" No need to socialize. No need to force closeness. No need to appear likable. And he realized this wasn't loneliness. Not a bitter retreat. Not a failure to connect. This was recovery. Recovery after years of straining to keep up an image. Recovery after conversations where he had to suppress his true feelings. Recovery after relationships that drained him, yet he didn't dare walk away from. The first time being alone, and he felt more at ease than ever. Not because he hated anyone, but because finally, he had come back to befriend himself. Top of form. After a long enough time of silence, he began to look at everything and everyone with different eyes. He made his circle of friends smaller. Not because he was arrogant, but because he understood. Not everyone deserves to be in his life that often. He no longer met people just because he was afraid to say no. No longer accepted invitations just because it's been a while since we gathered. Oh, he started asking himself before each meeting, does this person really make me feel at ease? He filtered every call. Some he let ring until it stopped. Some he looked at the name and decided not to answer. Not because he wanted to seem distant, but because he no longer wanted to open up to people who only came when they needed something. He was no longer easily persuaded by soft words. A pleasant voice no longer mattered. He looked at how they lived, how they reacted when he said no, how they showed up when he was silent. And if their way of living made him feel heavy, tired, drained, then he didn't keep them. He didn't close his heart. He just didn't want to open the door for storms anymore. Because in the end, after all the times he had been swept away, he realized the house inside his heart should only be kept for those who know how to keep it peaceful. Now, when he walks into a crowded room and chooses to sit quietly in a corner, people start whispering, he seems sad these days. They don't know. That was the first time he truly felt so light inside. He no longer had to force himself to start conversations. No longer had to laugh at a dull joke. No longer had to keep the atmosphere cheerful, just so everyone would think he was still fine. He still loves, still cherishes those beside him, but he no longer embraces the whole world in his heart like before. He no longer thinks it's his responsibility to heal anyone, to pull someone out of their sadness, or to listen to every confession when he himself no longer had the strength to take it in. He isn't cold, not arrogant, not distant. He just chooses to love, with limits, to communicate, selectively, and to be present, consciously. No one has to understand him anymore, and he doesn't need anyone to understand him either, because when he smiles, it's because his heart is truly joyful. When he speaks, it's because he has something to say. When he stays, it's because he feels it's worth it. He doesn't avoid the crowd. He just doesn't need it to prove that he still exists. Because for the first time in many years, he is the one confirming his own presence, not through someone else's eyes, not through collective laughter, not through fleeting applause that quickly fades. Now, he no longer has to smile just to fit the mood. He only smiles when his heart is calm enough to smile for real. If someone notices, he no longer shows up at familiar gatherings, no longer joins in noisy conversations, no longer nods out of habit whenever someone tells a story. Don't worry. He isn't angry at anyone, not sad with anyone, and he hasn't withdrawn because he was hurt. He's just choosing again something he once lost. Silence. It was something that belonged to him before he learned how to please, before he let others lead his emotions, before he lived by someone else's pace instead of his own. Now, when he's silent, it's because he's listening to himself. When he's alone, it's because he's recovering. When he doesn't respond immediately, it's because he's no longer carried away by what isn't important. He still cares, still cherishes, still remembers those who once walked with him, but if his presence once felt like an obligation, now it will only be a choice. And if he chooses not to appear, that isn't withdrawal. It's honesty, with himself. He isn't rejecting society. He's just refusing to lose himself in it one more time.